Hello. Hello, New York. Hello, New York Comic-Con. I don't know, is this too sexy? Is it too early for me to sound this good? I have had a lot of caffeine, folks. I have had not a lot of caffeine and not a lot of sleep, not a lot of words. You're in for a ride tonight is what I'm saying here. There's been caffeine and sleep in vastly disproportionate amounts over the last couple of days. And the first interview I did today, they're like, so what do you like to drink? And I'm like, well, just in general? Because like in my little 50-word bio, you look for like kind of vaguely interesting things that you can say in less than 50 words. So it's like, Pat Rothfuss teaches English and brews mead and, hugs puppies, And so they brought mead, and apparently this is part of this interview series where it's like you have a drink before you start the interview. And I'm like, I have had 16 hours of sleep over the last 5 days. And I got up and I just had literally 8 shots of espresso in a cup so that I could come here and talk sensibly for 15 minutes. And you're like, hey, we hear you like meat, and here's a bottle of it, and I'm going to pour you a glass of it right on camera. Ha ha ha, guess who can't say no? So I'm like, great, let me put this right in my body. Let me put this right in my body, and then let's just see what words come out. So I'm drunk, is what I'm getting at here. So, no, don't encourage me. I'm not checking my tweets here. What I'm actually doing is I'm going to try to be responsible. And, I was going to set up a stage timer right there. I get to see myself on the monitor, too, and then worry about my hair for the next 50 minutes. It's okay, I suppose. Oh, for those of you who has no idea who I am, and they're just like, it seemed like a line. Oh, boy, I'm so sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Rothfuss. Let's do the official introduction. This is probably equally disorienting to people who have merely, read a book of mine and then saw my name. It's like, maybe I'll go to his author talk. He writes the books, right? He seems like an intelligent and literate fellow. Perhaps the sort of man who would wear a jacket with patches on the elbows. Perhaps somebody who would speak with an Oxford accent. Perhaps I've heard he taught English once before he had to stop. Welcome to my island. For those of you that don't know, I have trouble taking things really seriously. I have a couple of things that I can read here. They're primarily short things, stuff that you wouldn't find elsewhere. I used to write a humor column. I occasionally write book reviews that end up being more comedy pieces than book reviews. I wrote poetry back in the day, and I carry some of those with me, mostly as penance and to keep myself humble. But I could always potentially read one of those as well. But most of what we're probably going to do here is Q&A, by which I mean you will have the opportunity to ask questions, which will be questions. I would really like to specify questions. Elaborate theories or musings or an idea you had or a story about your cat. Let's hold those to the very end. If we exhaust all the questions and I've told all my stories and I've made all my jokes, then we will open the floor to those other things. First questions. And then I will respond to that question by telling a story which may in some way relate to the topic you have addressed. So really, to call this a question and answer period is a little bit misleading, but I figured I'd be upfront with you right now about that. So with all those caveats and addendums right out in the front, does anybody have a question maybe before I pick something to read? Yeah.
says that writers are either architects or what was it, gardeners. Do you know what I'm talking about? What are you? Do you plan it all out like years in advance, or does it come to you as you do it?
It's the, are you a gardener or an architect? Probably more of a gardener. I'm becoming increasingly unhappy with binaries. They're so comforting. You know, it's like, oh, everything goes into one box or another, or it's a spectrum with two ends. But even a spectrum is really misleading. So yeah, I know a lot of people, they outline and then they pretty much almost transcribe from their outline into their finished manuscript. I am not that. But that is not to say that I don't benefit from an outline occasionally, though I hate it. I really hate it. I used to claim that I never outlined at all, and then I realized I did like a nice bulleted list. And then sometimes if those bullet points were really complex and they had sub-bullets, that was also nice. That helped me sort of like clarify a few of my thoughts. And then I'm like, son of a bitch. And I realized the only reason I hated the thought of outlining is because in the second grade, our teacher wrote out outlines on the chalkboard and we had to copy them, which pedagogically, as I say that out loud, like I have been a teacher, like, what was going on there? What were we supposed to learn from that? Except for a hatred of outlines. If that was the purpose, then it succeeded. Other questions? Also, hold on, I will say this. That was the only question we'll ever get to. I'm just... First off, I realize we probably have these two blinding sodium lamps pointing at me so that I'm lit for these cameras. Do we have control over them? Can we take those down just a notch? Because one, I feel a little bit like I'm strapped to a chair in a cement room and somebody's really gonna start asking me some questions now. And two, because it makes it a little harder to see all your beautiful faces and the hands that go up. And and also because the dimmer the lights are, the better I will look. And they're not going down, so I assume that that's a done deal. Yeah, what do you got?
Have you heard any music that Lin-Manuel Miranda has written for the Kingkiller universe, or is the process not here yet?
The question is, have I heard have I heard any music that Lin-Manuel Miranda, the fabulous Lin-Manuel Miranda, here in New York, I don't have to explain that, do I? He is signed on to my project. Lin-Manuel Miranda's on my project, right? No, that's so unhealthy for me. Don't encourage me. He is on board. The question is, have I heard any of the music that he's produced for the show or the movie or the world? And the answer is yes. Next question.
Is what Marie still a real thing?
It's always funny. No, the question is, do I have any ideal casting for my world? There's actors that I like. You know, like you watch Firefly and you're like, Nathan Fillion is the best. And so then I'm like, yay, Nathan Fillion. And then you take him and you're like, where does he fit in my book? I'm like, is he this? Is he... And that's why I'm not a casting director, right? Because that's probably the wrong way to figure out who is in a movie, right? It's like, it's not like, hey, who do you like? I like Patrick Stewart. Great. Where does he, let's just make a list of all the people we like. It's not a party I'm inviting people to. So I think about it occasionally, but I think the big thing is that they just need to be really, really good actors. That's what I really want, is people who can really, really act. Yeah.
Hi. So last year you read a book to us. So I bought that one and the second one. Are you making more books similar to that, like with the princess?
So last year I did The Adventures of the Princess and Mr. Whiffle up here. We had a little bit of story time. And so she's asking, we've got 2 of those books, which the Strand actually does have available for sale, where I was signing books before, and I'll be signing books later on. I'm just pointing in the direction, generally speaking, through several walls. They're not actually in this room. Please don't rush over there right now. So those 2 books are there. I don't really have specific plans to write a 3rd one. If I got an idea for it, then I'll probably team up with my friend Nate Taylor and we'll do a 3rd princess book.
Maybe something similar with other characters that's similar with this choice?
I don't know. I mean, if it was going to be a 3rd princess book, it would have some of the same characters. It would probably share similarities between the first 2 books as the second one did of the first one. Got no plans. Maybe I should read a thing. Because I do like Q&A, but it does say reading on the event listing, and so I probably should do at least a little bit of that. Is it going to throw things off if I switch to this mic now? See, making the sound people earn their money today. Okay, let's see what I've got here. How young are the kids here? 1, younger. I mean, sometimes we call this, sometimes it's an afternoon with Pat Rothfuss. Sometimes if we put it like at 9 o'clock, I get to call it Rothfuss After Dark. And in those instances, we can say like, hey, there will be potentially some more than your average cussing. You make your own good choices, everyone. If you have brought kids here, then just make your own good choices. And this isn't, I'm not going to traumatize anyone here, hopefully, but I found this recently because I was going through Goodreads and I was talking to somebody and they said, oh, I read this book, and I go, oh, I did this. And I went on to Goodreads and I found this review that I had written that I'd forgotten about for a couple of years, and I reread it, and like all narcissists, I laughed uproariously at my own thing. So I thought maybe I'll dust it off and print it out and see if it sounds funny when I read it out loud. Who has read Roald Dahl? Okay? I have 2, you know, like I love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and read that to my boy, and was sort of like, yeah, Roald Dahl, this is the good time. We're going to read to my little boys. And then I read some of his other books. And then I read this book. I read SEO Trot, and I had a lot of thoughts and feelings, and then I wrote them down. Last chance to get your kids out. Last chance to turn your phone off. I should check mine too, that'd be super embarrassing. Fuck this book. That's it, that's the whole review. Boy, those of you that don't read my blog or follow me on social media, I am really sorry. I'm really sorry if this is not what you were thinking it would be, and you are sitting in like the middle of the aisle and there's no good way for you to get up. I am really sorry. I'm really sorry. I hope that you've learned a lesson today. I don't know what that lesson should be. Don't have those plans for you. It's your life. I'm just hoping you can get something out of this experience other than terror and despair. Feeling of being trapped while some strange hobo man cusses at you from a stage. Fuck this book. Don't read it to your kids. That's the short version. If you want the longer version, settle in. We're gonna have a bumpy ride. Also, there's spoilers here, and cussing, and some indignation. Be warned. I've always thought of myself as a bit of a Roald Dahl fan. I read the BFG growing up, and I loved it. I watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I loved it. But recently, my love dimmed a bit when I read James and the Giant Peach, a book that was a serious boatload of meh. A nickel's worth of story in a $1 book. And don't you dare say to me, oh, it's just a children's book, or kids don't know any better, or you can't hold YA fiction to the standards of, no, just stop. That's such bullshit that it's an insult to the word bullshit. Kids' books should be just as good as any other books. In fact, they should be held to a higher standard than other literature for the same reason that we take extra care with children's food. The fact is, what you feed your kids is important, and that includes what they put in their heads as well as what they put in their bellies. So let's talk about this book, SEO Trot. In this story, you have Mr. Hopper, who loves two things, the flowers that grow on his balcony and his downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Silver. He is terribly lonely, and he is terribly shy. His downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Silver, has a pet tortoise that she adores. The tortoise is named Alfie. He lives on Mrs. Silver's balcony, and Mr. Hoppy is terribly jealous of him. Yeah, right? Like, poor son of a bitch. You become jealous of a turtle, you've really made some choices in your life at some point. That's not kind-hearted of me. Oh, but just wait. One day, Mrs. Silver laments to Mr. Hoppy. They talk on their balconies, you see, she with her turtle and him tending his garden. She's had Alfie for 11 years, and he's still tiny. She wishes he would get bigger. I'd give anything to make that happen, she says. Now, Mr. Hoppy gets all Twitter-pated hearing this, so he lies to her, telling her that he knows a magic spell that will help her tortoise grow. And I quote, "I beg you tell me, Mr. Hoppy, I'll be your slave for life." When he heard the words, "your slave for life," a shiver of excitement swept through Mr. Hoppy. Now, we're not judging anyone's lifestyle choices here, but we owe it to ourselves to be appropriately judgy of people's choices of how they behave. So Mr. Hoppy gives her some bullshit he makes up, telling her it's a spell that he learned from a Bedouin. Then he goes out and buys 100 tortoises. Then he builds a long grabber arm of the sort that you would use if you wanted to, say, steal someone's tortoise off the balcony right below yours. And at this point I thought to myself, he's not doing what I'm thinking, is he? And then I flipped a couple of pages and told my son that it was bedtime and we'd finish this book tomorrow. Disappointed, he went to bed, and I finished the book. And here's what happens. Mr. Hoppy spends the next 2 months slowly replacing Mrs. Silver's pet with progressively larger tortoises. Mrs. Silver is amazed by this, of course, and out of gratitude, she marries Mr. Hoppy. Then Mr. Hoppy gives away all the tortoises, including Alfie, Mrs. Silver's pet of 11 years. And do I really need to explain to anyone that this is really fucked up? Do I feel bad for Mr. Hoppy, this lonely, shy man? Do I empathize with the fact that he loves someone but can't bring himself to tell her? Hell, yes. I have been that guy in my life, sure. But his actions are fucking awful here. And their matter-of-factness makes them doubly awful. Hey there, lads, it seems to say. Love a girl? Here's what you can do. Lie her, trick to her, steal from her, make her obligated to you, and then you get to be in a relationship. And that's not even touching on the subject The fact that Mrs. Silver is shown to be a complete fucking idiot who recites a magic spell 3 times a day to make her tortoise grow, and then fails to notice when her beloved pet of 11 years is exchanged for a completely different animal, not just once, but several times. Suffice to say, the next night when my boy asked to read the rest of the story, I deviated from the original script. This was made a little more difficult by the fact that the book is heavily illustrated. Even so, I was fairly confident I could do better than the original, trick her into marrying you storyline. In my version, in addition to buying a bunch of tortoises and building a tortoise grabber, Mr. Hoppy also goes to the grocery store and buys a bunch of vegetables. He then spends the rest of the week inventing recipes for tortoises and testing them on his new pets, figuring out which ones are the most delicious to tortoises. Then, every night, he uses his long-armed tortoise grabber to lift Alfie up to his apartment, where he feeds him delicious food. And as we all know, when you eat more, you get bigger, right? And he discovers that what Alfie likes best is some of the flowers Mr. Hoppy grows on his balcony, the flowers that Mr. Hoppy loves. So Mr. Hoppy uses these flowers from his garden in his recipes. And I described these to my boy in some detail to kind of pad out the story, because I am a fantasy author, after all. And Mr. Hoppy feeds Alfie every night, and Alfie grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, Mrs. Silver is overcome with joy and invites Mr. Hoppy down to her apartment to show off her lovely tortoise. She thanks Mr. Hoppy for his magic spell and asks him if he'd like to have tea. Over tea, Mr. Hoppy says, "Mrs. Silver, I have a confession to make." "Yes," she says. "That spell wasn't really magic," he said. "I just made it up." "Really?" Mrs. Silver said. "Yes," Mr. Hoppy said. "I've been feeding Alfie special recipes every night so he would grow bigger." "Oh, Mr. Hoppy," Mrs. Silver said, "I already knew that, but I'm so glad you told me yourself." "You knew?" he said. "You silly man," she said. "The balcony is right outside my window. Just like yours is. How could I not see you grab him every fucking night?" "Ah," Mr. Hoppy said, feeling rather stupid. He thought he was being pretty clever. "You're right, of course. I did. You caught me. But I did it because I love you. I knew Alfie was really important to you, and I wanted you to be happy." "I know that too," Mrs. Silver said. "And I'm so glad you're finally brave enough to tell me." And then they get married. I would have preferred to have them go out for coffee or something, but there was a picture of them getting married in the book. So I had to leave that part in. In my version, however, they also worked together to publish a book of recipes for tortoises, and then they used the money from that book to start a tortoise park where Mr. Hoppy puts his 100 now surplus to requirement pets. But apparently I was pushing my luck a little bit there, because when I told him this last part, my boy gave me a look. "Did you make that up?" he asked. "Ah," I said. "You're right, of course, I did. You caught me. But I did it because I love you." So yeah, that's what I do when I review books on Goodreads. What I do is probably not review books at all on Goodreads. Just if you wander over there, I sometimes talk about my feelings about books. I don't think that's the same as a review, really. Sometimes I get angry. Sometimes I just tell a story that I thought of while I was starting to review the book. What other questions do we have? Yes.
I emphasized the lack of sleep, and just wanted to ask you, how was the road to Sinuet?
That is a good question. I'm just going to call on everyone who's wearing a cloak. That's going to be my new deciding factor.
So you talk a lot about silences
That's a good question. Therapy. Everyone should go to therapy. Who's going to therapy? Who loves therapy? Right? Seriously, go to therapy. Like, you would have book 3 right now if I had started therapy about 10 years earlier. Don't wait till you need it a lot before you start it, is what I'm saying. Let's skate up over the top of that discussion before I get a little maudlin or get preachy. In the back, in the bonnet. I will need you to, really project.
There's a Kickstarter called Adventure that has a name of the wind expansion. I was curious whether companies like that approach you for partnerships, or if you kind of have a conversation and those kind of happen, and are there any other ones in the works?
She asked about the Call for Adventure Kickstarter, which they did approach me, and they're like, hey, we want to do a game. Do you want to be a part of it? And I'm like, well, what's the game? And so I played it, and it was a cool game, and it was a storytelling game, and the mechanics were well executed, and it was simple and fun to play. I don't ever want to be involved, like, I don't ever want to make I'm trying to think of really crappy merch. Because I kind of do want to make like a Name of the Wind lunchbox. Because that would be my example of like really crap, like why would anyone make, but I want a Name of the Wind lunchbox. I would, but it would say the name of the lunch on it. And we'd use like the same font. Like, I don't know why I want that. Lost the thread. What was I talking about? People do approach me a lot for making games or having a tie-in or having a character of mine appear in a game or something like that. But I don't, I only want to be involved. I only want to bring things to you guys that are really good. I don't want to put my name to something that isn't going to delight you in some way or that I feel has a very high likelihood of you enjoying a lot. So I get approached for a lot of things, and I maybe do 1 in 30, 1 in 40, 1 in 60. I very rarely sign on for a project like that. Yeah.
What's the best advice you give to a first-time DM?
Best advice I would give to a first-time DM, to clarify, for those of you that don't know, that means Dungeon Master. To clarify further, not to judge anyone's lifestyle, but it's a kink thing. My advice, if you're running a dungeon, it's always important to think about the people that have come to your dungeon. You got to think, what do these people really want? And that requires a lot of very clear communication. You have to ask very specific questions. Sometimes people will want to play a character. And that's fine, so long as everyone is clear as to the nature of that character and the motivations of that character. Sometimes the motivations can remain secret for a while. They'll come out through the course of play. I could do this all day. Oh, this is a really good joke, and I'm gonna get in trouble for this. Not from the con, like, everyone who knows me is gonna see this and look at me and be like, still, this is really good advice, and I'm getting, it's double advice, right? This is advice for like so many more people than I normally get to give advice to at once. And some people can use this advice in 2 different places in their life. So right, we've got the basics: good communication, Consent, clear verbal consent, understanding of boundaries. This really holds up well. Remember that although you are technically in charge of this experience, it's really in many ways for them. And if you forget that, you just think that you're there for yourself, then everyone isn't going to have a good time. Everyone is supposed to have a good time. Now, some people will say that you have to know all the rules going into a situation like this. And the truth is, being familiar with the rules is helpful. But to think that like, oh, you need to read all the books, before you get into a situation like that. No, a lot of times there's a lot of more free form play. And sometimes if you learn too many of the rules ahead of time, it sort of limits the creativity that a group can have when they get together. Because they assume that you can only do this or only do that. If you're curious about what books might be good for this, you can check out my Goodreads profile. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I feel like I'm borrowing happiness from the future because I feel like right now somebody just feels like someone has walked over their grade and they're texting me angrily and it's like, I don't know what you're doing, but it's very bad. Did I hit, was that good advice? Is that helpful? I'm here to help. Okay, where, you.
I have no idea who you are.
Not a question, but noted.
My friend has been talking about you for a year. Surprise me here, you're hysterically funny. I still don't know what you write.
Well, a lot of people know me from the gaming community. I write mostly fantasy. Is probably, if people know of me because of books, it's because I write fantasy books. What genre? Pick a genre, make yourself happy. I'm kind of all over the place. Maybe heroic fantasy, epic fantasy, big, like thick fantasy. Do we genre books just by weight or mass now? What are your books like? And I'm like, like about 900 pages? About 900 pages. So yeah, fantasy. At the beginning. When you get to the end, I would stop. If you keep reading after the end, let me know how that goes. Like, it started as a joke and now I'm really curious. I've only written 2 books. There's Name of the Wind, Wise Man's Fear. Start with Name of the Wind. And if you like it, then you can read the next one. And if you don't, it's really thick and you can use it to prop up your computer monitor. And then, like to the right ergonomic height so you don't get a crick in your neck. Yeah.
So, when you're on, like, social lines and that, do you ever get nervous when you're on, like, a live camera shoot like that, role-playing?
Do I ever get nervous when I am live on camera? Well, and she specifically mentioned role-playing. I do, a lot of people don't know me for my books. They know because I hang out and I play D&D with Acquisitions Incorporated, or I guested in on the Misclicks once, or I do some streaming sometimes, or with Critical Role. I'm assuming Critical Role fan over here. This is a great outfit, by the way. So I do a lot of D&D stuff. I am not ever spooked going onto camera for those things. Now, what will happen, beforehand, I'll feel a tiny bit of productive nervousness. You know, it's effectively my body sort of kicking up into, and this is the scientific term for that. My body kicks up into a little bit of an arousal state. Can't keep going on down that road. We'll go to a dark place. Like a dungeon. No. God damn it, now I forgot what I was talking about. Arousal state, yeah, thank you. And so, and this is actually a useful thing. A lot of performers will talk about being nervous ahead of time. There's a difference between nervous and being hugely anxious. I know some people who are performers who have a solid puke before they get onto stage every time, or they jitter, or they drink, you know? And I don't get that because, honestly, I really enjoy this. There are some types of performance that I don't enjoy as much, but this is just talking and telling stories to, generally speaking, a very accommodating audience. I was gonna make a joke. I usually say, oh, how beautiful, and whatever you want. And in the context of this particular talk, I don't feel comfortable talking about your appearance at all. So, sorry, normally I'm really complimentary. Let's not do that, though. Afterwards, what happens to me, where my anxiety comes from, is after the show, I think back on what I did, and I'm like, oh no. Oh no, because I used to do some improv comedy. I love making people laugh. And so in the moment, I will go for the joke sometimes in a way that looking back on it, I'm like, oh, Pat, that wasn't, you're better than that. But I'm not. Okay. Let's see, yeah. So the question is, she liked the Slow Regard of Silent Things. It's a little novella. Would I ever do another one of those for a different character? Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't have one planned right now, but it was fun kind of getting to explore that. There was something similar, the Lightning Tree sort of followed Bast around a little bit, so you get to see Bast kind of on his own. Those are fun stories to write. They sort of help me explore the characters and help me explore the world in a different way. I've already called on you.
So I read your books in Hebrew, and your books have lots of puns and wordplay and many things that are hidden between the lines. How do you get it from English to different languages without hurting everything I say?
The question of translation is a big one. It's always big. Anytime you translate anything into a different language, it can't be the same. And it's especially a problem with my book because I use language in very particular ways, and I hide a lot of secrets in my books. Who's read the books twice? Who's read the books 3 times? 4 times, 5, 6, anybody get 10? Some people 10. There's a reason that a lot of people read them more than once. Of the people that have read it more than once, who found surprising things in the later reads? There's a lot in the books you simply cannot understand until you read them a second time. or there are things in Name of the Wind that you can't understand until you've read Wise Man's Fear. And there's things in both those books that you won't be able to understand until you read Doors of Stone. But that's the way that I wrote them, very deliberately, and that makes for a very long-lasting reading experience. You know, they're kind of, if you read my books only once, you've kind of missed most of them. The problem is how do I let a translator know what all the secrets are? And in this instance, I have a secret translator forum, where they are all welcome to come and ask me questions. And there's documents that say, hey, this is important, this is important. This seems like an incidental detail, but it will become important later, stuff like that. There's other problems, though, because I create fake languages. You know, it's a nightmare. I could never translate, even if I were fluent in a different language. You can't translate wordplay. You can't translate poetry. You literally cannot translate the title of the novella, Slow Regard of Silent Things. It is not translated as that in any of the other 30 foreign language translations. Why? Because what does it mean? What does it mean? You break it down into its component parts and then you put those words together and it's like, it doesn't mean anything. Like the last line of the prologue, it was the patient cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Ooh, what does that mean? How the hell do you translate that? Not my job. My books are a nightmare to translate, ultimately. And anyone who tackles it, I feel bad for them, you know? They have a job of work cut out for them. Somebody really excited over here? Or they just have a fan club? Okay, yeah. Yeah.
If you had to pick a favorite character, who would it be and why?
Out of anything?
Out of the ones that you've written.
Oh, out of my characters.
Yeah.
If I had to pick a favorite character out of the ones that I have written, who would it be and why? It changes from day to day. Kind of like if you have a family, sometimes. It's not like that wasn't a joke. Like if you have a family, sometimes you like some members of your family better than others? Is that not how it's supposed to work? Am I doing it real wrong and I didn't even realize it? Oh my God, does everyone know who they like best in their family and it just stays that way forever? Is that what? I'm really self-conscious. This is what I will worry about after the show. Some characters I really like when I'm writing them. Some characters I really hate when I'm writing them because they're really hard to write for. Ari has a very fond place in my heart, and I know a lot about her, and I'm very fond of her. Elodin is a lot of fun to write as well. But again, it depends on my mood and what I'm reading and what I'm writing. Yeah, I wish I could give you a better, sort of like a pithy, clever answer to that, but it's more complicated than just like who's my bestie in my books.
Who's the character that's hardest to write for?
Character that's hardest to write for is Denna. She's the hardest character in the book.
Do your characters talk to you when you're writing them?
No. No, not really. Do my characters talk to me when I'm writing them? How much time do we have here? Boy, not a lot of time. There's a lot of things that get assumed. There's something that I think of as the myth of the author, where authors are sort of like magical creatures of some sort with powers, and then, you know, they can get like wizard ailments like writer's block, you know, where like nobody else gets block, and you know, like plumbers don't get plumber's block. I mean, you kind of, you know, like if you make cabinets, you know, you don't have like cabinetry block, you know, joiner's block, cooper's block. Those things don't exist in the mythology. So why do authors get a thing like that? What I think is frequently thought of as writer's block is really just undiagnosed depression, because writers tend to have mood disorders about 10 times more likely than the general populace. It's just a weird statistic. We also kill ourselves way, way more, like about 8 times more likely than the general populace. So all the aspiring writers out there, I'm just saying, hey, therapy. Therapy. Also, not killing yourself, real good. Real good. Everyone here, still alive? Real good. I really approve. What was the question I was supposed to be answering there? I really don't remember. No. No, they don't. No, they don't. And see, this is part of the whole myth of the writer, because I've heard writers say things like, oh, I was writing this scene and the characters just took over the scene and it just went on off in this other direction. And they remind me of parents. Like if you go to a restaurant and you see some parents and they have their kids there, and their little demon children are running around and they're kicking over the fern and like throwing bread. And the parents are like, oh, I know. They just run away. They just say, you can't do a thing. Oh, kids, you know. And back before I was a parent, I used to look at those people and I'd be like, control your fucking children. Do your job. Discipline those children. And now that I'm a parent, right, and I know more, I think, control your fucking children. Right? It's not easy, it's not always fun, but that's your job. You gotta teach them the rules of civilization and to leave the fucking fern alone and no, sit down, no, put your pants on, no, we're not throwing bread. Okay, now you have a timeout. And it doesn't matter if you're crying, I know you're sad, really have a timeout. And that's how you're a parent, except you have to do that 10,000 times and you feel like shit a lot. And that's what you have to do. Also, as a writer, if your characters start to go off on their own and have a marvelous adventure and it fucks up your scene, you gotta say, no! Get over here. Into the dungeon. One of us is in charge here. I am in charge. You'll do, no, this is gonna get weird. It's gonna get real weird, it's gonna get bad. But I'm kind of proud of the fact that I kind of brought that all the way around to the end of the talk. It sort of provides a Aristotelian unity to this horrible double entendre, horrible thing that's gonna end up on the internet and people will watch it and, oh, I'm gonna catch hell. Okay, let's do one more question. Make it something that I can somehow redeem myself with. Red shirt. Ah, boring. Antlers. No, hold on. Did you say as a professional?
Mental health.
Oh, what do you do? Cool. Out of curiosity, as a mental health professional, and I'm going to borrow some of your authority if you don't mind, what are the statistics for people, the general population, out of everyone, how many people have a some neuroatypical stuff going on, both diagnosed and undiagnosed. What are the current numbers?
That's a complicated question because of comorbidity, but individual like mood disorders, you pointed out, it's between 3 and 10% of the population, but that can be co-occurrence with a lot of other disorders, so that number can be a little higher. Anxiety disorders is around 10%.
So mood disorders, anxiety disorders, that sounds like about a third of the population either has it and it's diagnosed or doesn't know and is still dealing with it?
Yeah, and there's, it's hard to tell the numbers, but I suspect there are a lot of the undiagnosed because it's so stigmatized and mental health.
So I'm just going to say a third of the people in this room didn't raise their hands. Interesting statistical, very rough statistical analysis here. If you go into therapy and you're fine, you know what? It's great news. It's like if you go into the doctor and he's like, you're fine, get out of here. You don't feel bad. And if they're like, ooh, here's a problem, you need to fix this, stop this or you'll die, that's also good. That's how you should go into the doctor. It's the same with therapy. Really think about it.
So, for my question, when my dog gets crazy, I lament that I don't have any time to do my creative stuff. Then when I get time off, I'm kind of like, eh. So how do you get through those creative doldrums?
So what you're asking me, Patrick Rothfuss. So what you're asking me, oh, I forgot, this is my new bio that I use for everything. It's my one-line bio. Hey there, everyone. I am two-time author Patrick Rothfuss. What you're asking me, Patrick Rothfuss, is when it's hard to engage in a creative thing, how do you motivate yourself? Therapy. Here's the thing. Fuck, man, I don't know. If you figure it out, send me a postcard or something. The truth is, like, creative endeavors are sometimes really hard. And if you're living in a situation where you're under a lot of stress, if you are working a lot, if someone you love is sick, if the republic you live in is burning down around you, and you're constantly confronted with, like, the insanity of the world, and you don't know if you're awake or asleep, dreaming, and it's a terrible dream, and you can't wake up, and you wake up in the morning, and you're just constantly afraid, it's hard to, like, write your fucking book. It's hard to do anything. But this is the other part of what I consider the myth of the author. Plumbers don't have plumber's block, and a carpenter doesn't have carpenter's block. But if a carpenter breaks their arm and they show up, they go, Jerry, go home. You are useless. You cannot carpent. But a writer writes with their brain. And if you have, say, an undiagnosed mood disorder or an anxiety disorder or any of the other boatload of things that can kind of junk up your think, it's hard for you to do your brain job. And some of those things are just situational, like your dog dies, and nobody expects you to go out and write 10 pages when your dog dies. But we glamorize the profession of writing, and we have a really sick cultural concept of the fact that art comes from misery, which is super not true. Art occurs sometimes despite misery, or it is informed by misery, but it's not from that. So if you're having trouble doing a creative thing, maybe think about why you want to do the creative thing. Maybe think about, how am I doing? Do I need to take care of myself in some way? Maybe think, maybe I'm using a lot of my energy to take care of myself already, or the people around me, or just to not, like, constantly scream all the time. And if that's where I'm putting all my energy, maybe my energy needs to go there and I can leave off the crocheting or whatever other creative endeavors you used to fill with your time. It happens to everybody, and it's healthy. You can pick up a hobby, you can put down a hobby. There's a difference between a hobby and a job. A hobby should always be fun. It got depressing. I want one more question, but let me have a funny answer to it. I'm trusting you guys. Put your hands down if I can't have a funny answer to it. You.
Can you talk about how you approach world building?
Can't talk about how I approach world building. That's a big craft question. I don't think I can make it funny. Baseball cap. Yeah. You are wearing a baseball cap.
Earlier today at the Rick and Morty D&D panel, you stopped yourself from making a political joke. Let's hear it.
I didn't have a particular political joke in mind. I was just gonna vomit bile and sheer hot rage for a while, and nobody is necessarily here for that. In the back. Yeah. Do I dream about my characters? I don't think so. Yeah, sorry. I betcha. Oh, I am at time, folks. And as a matter of fact, I'm so sorry I went a little bit over time. It's because you're all such lovely conversational partners. I've enjoyed, conversational partners. Thank you for coming along with me on this weird ride. If you want to catch me later in the con, my schedule is online on the blog. I just linked to it on Twitter. Please don't rush the stage desperately hoping to have a moment, or I'll sign a thing real quick, because I'm going to go see a show and I need to run to get there on time. Thank you so much for coming.